How you guys doing? Okay, I go make reach 100 before I start. Sorry, my internet was acting up, but it's back on today. It's back on now. It's back on now. Okay. The internet is fixed. How is everybody doing? Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Details. Today is going to be interesting. Plenty talk day, plenty yabis. Plenty yabis. I tell now. Get ready. But before I go into the topic, how Africa was colonized, I want to touch on two things real quickly. So, two things where I noticed this week, where I feel say people need to take little cognizance of. Say we suppose know, say, this kind of thing happen. So real quick, before we go into it, how many people hear about? How many people remember when Ovation magazine, Dele Momodu? How many people remember when Dele Momodu go Senator Dino Melaye house? Go show us in your achievements. These things I want to talk about, it tie into how Africa was colonized, because what is going on right now? Our ancestors say we must fight against second slavery. We must fight against second slavery. We think saying a joke, we are thinking we can no longer be enslaved. African people think it's impossible for us to be enslaved again. Forgetting that in Libya here already, people are enslaved, So when Dele Momodu go for Dino house, Senator Dino Melaye, they show am only achievements. And the biggest achievement, I swear down, the biggest achievement, now say, in watches, those expensive watches. And I remember we show us inside the house. No be say, as senator in Nigeria for over so and so years, for this and that, look at what I achieved, look at this new thing that we are designing, look at this great thing that we made, look at this thing I'm developing in my country, look at this new technology we are investing in, locally inspired for our country, for young. No lie. Then he come show us in art. Then there was a fella picture in his house. I say, left to me. I think I will ban fella to be used in Nigeria in any way. Everybody was also embrace fella like this. That's it. One fella picture there in house. Then all the other artwork, now this European white men, all those Greek kind of art, just did the whole house, nothing African at all, in the center point where I see you, maybe they show, maybe this for some corner, but everything is so European style. And it made me realize one thing. See, what does it mean to be a successful man? Because whether I like it or not, no matter what I want to talk here, Senator Dino Melaye is one of Nigeria's most successful men. And I realized that the only thing successful African men can do is buy things. You are successful as an African man, people respect you because you can buy anything you want, not because you can make anything you want. African success is only because they can buy whatever they like, and they brag about buying whatever they like. And this is why we're going to talk about how Africa was colonized. It's important, because I know we don't know. Many of us don't know. So let's talk about it. I'm going to read the entire chapter. The entire chapter will be read today. So that's what we do, All African success, we just want to buy. As long as we can buy anything we want, we are successful. This is the idea. African young people must never be inspired to believe that they can make what they want. You understand what I'm saying? This is why we are going to jail. Hush Puppy is going to jail for 25 years because he wants to buy Richard Mille. But instead of him to Instead of us to live in a country where we are buying Ramoni Abbas. You understand? We are not living in a country where we can buy Ramoni Abbas. We are buying Richard Miller and going to jail for it. We want to wear Gucci, white man name on our body because of things white people are making. Why can't Africans make those things? Why can't these people help us to bring out our potential? No, they must inspire us to dream to buy. Work hard to buy. Everything. But you cannot be if you do not make. You must make something. You know, and that's what these people don't understand. You know. The second story is the biggest badge of the week. Or what am I saying? The biggest fraud of the year. As usual, committed by our lovely Aliko. Silently. Nobody's even talking about it. See ya. Look. Can you see this? Is it to get here? NNPC to buy 20% stake in Dangote refinery for 2.76 billion. 20% for 2-point-something billion. Now this year, now Dangote's refinery is 670 something thousand barrels a day capacity. 20% for 2-point-something billion dollar, not naira, dollar. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the same day that they announced this investment, the same day NNPC and Dangote were announcing this, in America, Holy Frontier is to buy, completely buy. See, look, Holy Frontier to buy Sinclair oil, refining and logistics assets for 2.6 billion. Buy the entire thing. This refinery too has exactly 678,000 liters barrels per day. It also refines 678,000 barrels, the same size as Dangote own, including their entire assets, everything for 2-point-something billion. In Nigeria, Dangote own is 20% for 2 billion. Ha! And they will say Nigeria doesn't help anybody. They will say Nigeria don't help people. The business people will say Nigeria doesn't help them. Nigeria is heaping stress on them, that the government is their problem, whereas they are the problem. Listen, you people don't know it. I say, I tell you people something. Listen, that's why I want to take my time, because I can't be giving you highlight. I think Nigerians, you want highlight, and this highlight is not keen in your brain where what is going on. I want to read an entire chapter. All of you cannot sleep this night. We will read that chapter in this book together, so you will see the exact similarities, you know, of how we were colonized just before the invasion of our colonization in the 19th century, between 1830 and 1876, when the entire Africa was now completely under European domination. What led in the 300 years, because this thing has been going on for 400 years systematically, slave trade, so-called protectorate, then colonization. Now, over 400 years ago, Europe had already conquered the whole world. Africa was last. They don't take North America, they don't take South America, they don't conquer all those ones. Why? It took them 400 years to conquer Africa. And how come it was that point that it could happen? It's important. That's why I'm giving you all this modern, because you people sit down here, you think you can no longer be slaves. You think Europeans cannot just walk into this country right now and tell all of you to go back inside your house and shut up. Wait till they call you outside to come and start doing what they tell you to do. What will you do about it? But you think they cannot do it. You understand? And that's the same mistake your ancestors made. Instead of preparing themselves in case they were doing it, can never happen. It can never. How can they? You know the Magbadu law. So now see, you are only, they want to just be buy. They only, these people, I tell you, they only buy things. You can only buy. All the people you praise all the people you worship, all they can do is buy. They are not people that can make. And for Africa to grow, Africa must make. If you don't make, you break, fam. In fact, they don't even have to carry any of you anywhere. You people are ready for slavery in Europe and America. I remember that don't fall. In fact, maybe that is the reason why Nigerians are not doing anything about the situation of this country. You people wanted to get to the point. You people want to get to the point where you can be slaves again. So they come and carry you to Europe and America and Barbados and Jamaica. Abi? Okay. That's your plan, Abi. I see. I see. That's your plan. I can feel it. It will never happen. Okay. The European conquest of Africa. So, let's go. When Europe pioneered industrial capitalism, her demands upon the resources of the world increased tremendously. In addition to obtaining spices for her tables and manpower for her mines and plantations in the Americas, Europe set out to seize for her factories the mineral and agricultural resources of all the world. Her need to... Don't mind them. We'll start again. I don't even want to know where I was. I will start again because they just log me off and log me on again. Imagine these people. I will start this thing again. Yeah, these people will kill me. Let's go. So, when Europe pioneered, because slavery. Let me also give you this backdrop so that you understand more. One of the reasons why they started the protectorate treaty signing and colonization of Africa was because of slavery. That they wanted to help us end slavery. The same slavery that they helped us to start. They wanted to help us end it. You understand that? So this was the disguise, if you put it that way. So now let's hear the truth. Not the Wilberforce story that they always tell us in our school. Let's hear the truth. When Europe pioneered industrial capitalism, her demand upon the resources of the world increased tremendously. In addition to obtaining spices for her tables and manpower for her mines and plantations in the Americas, Europe set out to seize for her factories the minerals and agricultural resources of all the world. Her need to take African manpower to the Americas declined. So you understand? The need for Europeans to carry Africans for slavery. They didn't need that anymore. They were industrializing. They were now building machines. So they didn't need human beings anymore. You understand? Let's go. She needed instead to put African labor to work in Africa, digging up for her the riches of African mines. The trading companies that have for centuries bought and sold on Africa's coast were found inadequate for seizing and cutting off the raw materials of the African hinterland. Europe now felt a need to export her power into Africa's interior to reorganize the farms, the mines, and markets for Europe's greater profit. What does this mean? I tell people that till today, the reason why we have expensive food, why people in Africa are hungry, is because our arable land, a larger percent, up to 70% of the arable land in Nigeria, is used to grow cash crops, not food. Cash crops, cotton, cocoa, timber, rubber, things they can sell for industry, is what is consuming most of the land here in Nigeria. For instead of growing food like rice, like millet, like corn, like beans, like the things we eat, cassava, they use most of the land instead for cash crops. Cash crops that we are not even industrializing, so we don't even really need. Now let me continue from where I was. into Africa to reorganize the farms, the mines, and the markets for Europe's greater profit. Her adventurers banded together, obtained charters from their national governments, and came to seize the African market from the African middlemen with whom for centuries Europe had been content to trade. Africa's coastal rulers naturally resisted all encroachments and battled to maintain the status quo. They strove to retain their positions as middlemen, importing and distributing European wares to the hinterland and collecting produce from the hinterland markets and selling it to the European merchants who came to the coast. The new breed of European merchants, however, wanted direct access to the hinterland market so that by eliminating the profit of the African middlemen, they could enlarge European profit and directly supervise African production. The situation was ripe for conflict. British encroachment upon the sovereignty and trade of the Niger Delta states is a case in point. To their government at home, British traders bitterly complained that the people of the Niger Delta state sold the produce of the interior to them at a very much higher price than they had paid for it originally, even after they had paid for it, its transportation, so that they had made a good profit on the trade in other people's produce. The coastal states whined. Went even further. They were in the habit of collecting customs from Englishmen and more. With guns and ammunition bought from the English, these black savages dared to interfere with the free trade liberties of English monopolists by blocking access to the hinterland markets. British profits were too important to be allowed to suffer. In such ways, the natives, they urged, should be speedily and summarily dealt with. Send gunboats to uphold free trade, the would-be monopolists demanded. In response to such pressures from their traders, the European powers began systematically to interfere with the sovereignty of African states and to intrude in their internal affairs. The Europeans began to help one faction to depose the ruler and install another, and to bestow honors, titles, and recognition upon those who rule they found in their interest to support. The officially trumpeted goals of such interference was to suppress the slave trade and to promote legitimate trade. As elsewhere around the world, with the British in the lead, European insistence upon dominating trade brought gunboat diplomacy to the shores of Africa. European industrial power embodied in the gunboats had come to overawe Africa. The general effect was to undermine the power and sovereignty of African states. The era of gunboat diplomacy, consular interference, and trader intrigue was inaugurated in 1810, when a British squadron of 4 ships with a total of 98 guns was set out to patrol some 3,000 miles of the West African coast. Its mission was twofold: to enforce the British law of 1807 that declared the slave trade illegal, and to protect British legitimate traders, that is, those who did not deal in slaves. The arrival of the squadron exposed the military and political weakness of the African states. Where the African rulers had for over 3 centuries, that's 300 years, where the African rulers had for over 3 centuries, 300 years, protected trade in their domains and guaranteed the peace of the coastal markets, they could no longer do so. Their ability, and hence their right, to determine the rules and limits of trade within their domains withered under the shadow of British guns, with gunboats sheltering them. British traders quickly lost their fear and respect for the authorities of African coastal states and principalities. They began to intrigue and displace African traders from the control of the African side of the Euro-African trade. Before long, the British forced unequal trade treaties upon them and insisted that they open the markets of their hinterland to British participation. West African rulers resisted such demand. Trade wars and shooting wars erupted. So don't let anybody tell you that Africans did not fight when colonized. See, that's the biggest lie. When slavery was going on, slavery lasted for 400 years. There were 480 anti-slavery rebellions in Africa. You know, if you want to learn more about that, I mean, 100 books you can read. Any John Henry Clark, any, even in natives. My homeboy, my very good friend, you know, a very respected artist, Akala, his book The Natives, he talks about this in depth. You know, why they suppress the amount of resistance that we give to Europeans. You know, and this proves it, you know, as you can see. You know, trade wars and shooting wars erupted. But now let's see where they fucked up. One of the earliest and most instructive cases of the British naval and consular interference in African internal affairs occurred at Benin, one of the Niger Delta city-states. It began in 1836 when a ship of the British squadron entered the port of Benin and seized a Spanish ship it accused of waiting there for a cargo of slaves. Alali, the regent of Benin, imprisoned the British officers involved for intruding upon his domain. Thereupon, the squadron bore down upon the town and, under threat of razing it, effected the release of the imprisoned British men. By 1837, the British consul for the Bight of Biafra, through deep meddling in the internal dispute of Benin, had secured the deposition of the regent Alali and the accession to his full powers of the 20-year-old King William Depa Pepo. The alleged protector of slaving was gone. The heir was established on his throne. Double justice has been done. The British assured themselves and whoever cared to hear. Nevertheless, relations quickly soured between Pepo and the British. Like Alali before him, Pepo would neither brook British infringement on the sovereignty of his city-state nor tolerate British domination of its trade, valued at over £1 million a year at the time. In the crisis that ensued, the sovereignty and independence of Benin was challenged by British naval power. Benin lost. Pepo was deposed and banished, first to the offshore island of Fernando Po, where the British consul maintained his seat, then to the mid-Atlantic island prison of Ascension, and finally to London. Be it noted that unlike the conflict between British and Alali, Be it noted that unlike the conflict between the British and Alali, that between them and Dapa Pepo was not about the slave trade. It was purely over control of legitimate commerce in non-human commodities worth £1 million a year. So what is that telling us? Okay, you say you came to protect slaves, you pursued his uncle that was the regent, that was looking after the throne because he was too young. You now pursued the uncle. You brought the real king. You say it's the real king that must sit there. Now the real king sat there and he's not dealing slaves. But he has refused to let you control his trade, his legitimate trade that wasn't about human beings, that was palm oil and gin and all those kind of things and textile. And they still deposed him. Okay. But whatever the humanitarian excuses the British consul dreamed up to justify his interference with the sovereignty of Benin, his superior gunboat power gained him the day and broke the power and independence of the 3 centuries-old Pepo dynasty. To the east and west of Benin, this pattern of pretext and actions was repeated. After long interfering efforts, the British made similar breaches in the world of assertive African sovereign states that opposed their insatiable appetite for African trade. At Calabar, where African middlemen were planning to ship their palm oil directly to England to obtain higher prices, the British consul decided that the natives were inclined to be insolent and moved to teach them not to trifle with British capital. However, he gave out that they wanted to rid the land of human sacrifices, the throwing away of twins and other assorted savages prominent on the European polemical list, as he ordered British gunboats to bombard and level a section of the town of Old Calabar. Remember, as they teach us in school that Calabar people used to kill twins and all of that we put in our head to make us believe that we were savages. Amen. Remember all of that. The year was 1855. And Old Calabar palm oil trade was worth £500,000 a year at the time. Listen, £500,000 then is 500 million pounds today, at least. What am I saying? Maybe 50 billion. £500,000 in 1855 was probably 5 billion. Yeah, maybe 5 billion in today's money. Okay. The year was 1855, and Old Calabar palm oil trade was worth £500,000 a year at the time. The British also arrived in Lagos with their gunboats and proclaimed that they had come to stamp out the slave trade there. This trade, from which many British families had grown immensely rich over long centuries, had now, it was said, become unconscionable. It had begun perhaps to turn their full and prim stomachs. Therefore, in 1851, after detailed involvement in the affairs of the town, the British put Lagos under threat of naval bombardment, dethroned and banished King Kosoko, and installed another in his place. In 1861, they dispensed with the puppet rule, annexed the town, and claimed it a British colony. The British were not alone in using such tactics to seize African trade and undermine the sovereignty of our states. The French acquired land on the estuary of the river Ogowe, and in 1843 built thereon blockhouses for fighting African slave traders. From this beachhead, they established trading posts up the valley of the Congo for legitimate trade. In this manner, using the suppression of the slave trade as their pretext, and this era of European slave rivalry and gunboat diplomacy served as prelude to the European invasion of Africa that hurried to a climax after 1855. The threat of gunboats did not, however, extend far beyond the coast. Yet, the European traders wanted to trade in the hinterland. As part of their preparation for penetrating Africa, spying explorers and missionaries were sent inland. In the Niger Delta during the 1850s, Dr. W.B. Baiki, a missionary cum trader cum British Foreign Office agent, traveled up and down and across lower Niger Valley, spying out the land. At the end of his labor, armed merchants moved in. One of them, MacGregor Laird, brought his trading steamers up the Niger. Along the way, he encountered strenuous opposition from African traders who feared that their trade would be ruined by British intrusion into their markets. With gunboats placed on the banks, they fired upon the steamers, sank some and ran others aground or boarded them. In reply, long-range British gunboats opened fire. Towns and villages up to 70 miles from the coast were shelled. Military escorts were provided for steamers which traveled beyond the range of the gunboats. By the 1880s, Sir George Goldie, another merchant adventurer, had equipped a private fleet of 20 gunboats and sailed them up the Niger, bombarding town after town which opposed his monopolist penetration. Brass, Akassa, Abo, Asaba, Onisha, Ida, and Petani were a few of the towns to suffer the wrath of the merchant guns. But such armed trade was too risky and proved too costly for the traders. They desired peaceful and orderly markets. Others who wanted to build plantations and open up mines also desired peace in the land. They turned to their governments in Europe to put down African resistance and impose a European peace. Africa, they argued, could not be left barren. It had to be developed for the good of Europe, civilization, and the world. The development they envisaged, they said, could not be left to the initiative of native governments. But the white men could not settle the tropics. White labor could not therefore be employed to develop the resources of the tropics, as had been done in the temperate lands of Australia, New Zealand, and the Americas. But instead, Eureka! A few white men could conquer, organize, and superintend the labor of natives for the good of Europe. They therefore urged their national governments to export their political and military power to protect those Europeans who are willing to exploit with native labor the resources of the tropics for the benefit of the industries, people, power, and glory of their particular European nations. In the words of Cecil Rhodes of the British South Africa Company, national interest demanded that England deal with these questions of expansion and retention of the world. Put bluntly, all this amounted to a demand that Europe invade and conquer Africa and seize its trade and resources. When its industrial nations of Europe responded to such arguments, the scramble for Africa began. By 1855, all the major powers of Europe were persuaded. The Benin Treaty they signed that year set down principles whereby, with minimum friction, these rival powers could conquer and divide up Africa. Now, I want you people to know that this is very important. I'll read it again. By 1855, all major powers of Europe were persuaded. The Berlin Treaty they signed that year set down principles whereby, with minimum friction, these rival powers could conquer and divide up Africa. This was the first time in history that Europeans were united. I repeat to you, 1885 was the first time in history that Western nations of Europe were ever united. Go and check their history. They have been at each other's throats like this forever and ever. See the way they yab Africa now that we can never have peace, blah, 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 blah. Go and check European history. But upon Africa, upon the exploitation of Africa is the basis of this unity, this so-called unity that Europe has today. Go and check. Go and check it. Is in 1885 they stopped fighting themselves. They calm down. You know if you fight, calm, all this your fight everywhere. Let's share this thing. When we share it, everybody face what they give you. And you can see that the more, even though our freedoms in Africa today is nothing yet, the more we are getting back involved in the trade, the more African middlemen are getting back into the trade, the less unity Europe has. Check it. The more Africans are getting into, that's why we must be afraid of what is coming next. We must be afraid. If you are not afraid, then you don't know what is really going on, you know. But let me continue, let me continue. Let me continue. In 1885, all the major powers of Europe were persuaded. The Berlin Treaty decided that year set down principles whereby with minimum friction, these rival powers could conquer and divide up Africa. Rival powers, you see, it's very important. They were rivals forever and ever until this point. With their divide up Africa, with full support from their respective national government, with each in fear of losing choice land to the others, the companies of European adventurers quickened the tempo of their invasion. Less than 20 years after the Berlin Treaty was signed, some European power had planted a proprietary presence on every piece of Africa. Only Ethiopia and Libya escaped. In 1885, while the French Prime Minister Jules Ferry declared in the French National Assembly that France was embarking on vigorous colonization to procure markets and power for France, French agents and military missions left the blockhouse and trading stations on the coast of the Congo, invaded the interior, and brought it under French control. The area on the northern back of the Congo, or from the coast to the inland basin of the Ubangi Shari, was subdued and turned into Congo Francais, capital Brazzaville. The valley of the Ogowe was proclaimed the colony of Gabon in 1886. Other French forces, basing their operations on their coastal toehold in Dakar, marched east and inland to conquer and annex the upper Niger Basin. The invasion was not opposed. The invasion was not unopposed. In 1893, the Battle of Segu, the French defeated Amadou Segu and overthrew and scattered to the winds of exile the successors of Alhaji Umar. Thus ended the empire of the Tukulo, carved out a few generations earlier from Timbuktu on the bend of the Niger to the headwaters of the Senegal River by the Jihad or Holy War of Reform launched by Alhaji Umar. The conquering French pushed on. In 1898, after 16 years of war, they finally defeated Samori Touré. 16 years of war. You hear that? Because they make you feel like, oh, they just, they won't tell you, The conquering French pushed on. In 1898, after 16 years of war, they finally defeated Samori Touré and ended his long efforts to create in the upper basin of the Niger, southeast of the Tukulo Empire, between the headwaters of the Senegal and the banks of the Black Volta, a successor empire to the medieval Ghana and Mali. Among Samori's French adversaries were Colonel Joseph Jacques Joffre and Joseph Simon Guélénier, two future marshals of France. In the lower Niger Basin, the British in 1885 proclaimed the All Rivers Protectorate over the Niger Delta states. One of the opening actions of their invasion of the area was launched against King Jaja of Opobo. King Jaja's relations with the British were cordial until he opposed their ambition to control that hinterland trade upon which his power and prosperity rested. The British had commended him for his friendly and generous hospitality towards British traders in his port. As an ally of the British, listen to these bastard African men, no. As an ally of the British, he has sent a contingent of troops to fight with the British in their wars against the Ashanti. Imagine these people. These people. They are the same thing now. Till tomorrow. These bastards. Because of anything white. Gather army. Say go and destroy, help them. Didn't know that his own day was coming. Bastard. We have to swear for them. You know, understand? So that their spirit cannot rest in peace. We have to be remembering them. So that our... Okay. Because when they don't give them title, give them small cake and ice cream. White man don't show them love like this. They don't want... They are ready to destroy anything African. These people, I'm telling you, it is these same people, these spirits that is still ruling Africa till today. And if all of us don't wake up and purge ourselves of these people and their descendants, these are their descendants, direct bloodline descendants. Go and check their history. You don't know me. Let me finish. I'll be telling you so that your eye can open one day. As an ally of the British, he has sent a contingent of troops to fight with the British in their wars against the Ashanti. For that service, Queen Victoria of England presented him in 1875 with Britain's sword of honor. I just think they carry the sword, they dance for Opobo that time. They dance for Opobo. The British Queen give me sword. Hey, like the way of that say they dance when they say a Nigerian is making robot for Apple. Hey, he say Apple. Hey, like they say he will still make the bomb where they'll take on destroy all of them. Now when they can't take on that robot where he make, then they will send come destroy all of them. Now when they can't carry on and go back as slaves. Queen Victoria of England presented him in 1875 with Britain's sword of honor. In 1884, he was persuaded to bring his territory under British protection. Though he did so, he resisted all British pressures upon him to open up the market of Opobo's hinterland to British traders. He reiterated his position. My first and last words are that the country belongs to me, and I do not want white trader. The country belongs to him. See, they don't care about us, not the people. You know what they are thinking. The country belongs to me, and I do not want white trader there. Anyone who wants to trade with me, trade with me, he insisted, could do so at the port of Opobo. So the Anglo-Opobo Treaty of 1884 respected Jaja's ban excluding European traders from Opobo's inland markets. The British traders and political agents disliked this man. They grumbled at such a show of African independence, but they soon saw in the Benin Treaty, a treaty to which Jaja was not a signatory, an opportunity to lift Jaja's ban. They declared that the Benin Treaty superseded the bilateral treaty of the previous year. The 1884, then they signed treaty with Jaja. 1885, they did their own treaty. Jaja was not there, legally speaking, right? They declared that the Benin Treaty superseded the bilateral treaty of the previous year. They maintained that the free trade provision in Article 1 of the treaty overrode Jaja's objection to British entry into Opobo's domestic market. Jaja reminded them that he was not party to the Benin Conference or its treaty. Nevertheless, the merchants, with the support of the British consul and his gunboats, ventured to trade in the interior. Jaja declared a trade boycott and ordered his subjects not to trade with them. No one did. Thwarted, the British consul resorted to stratagem. He invited Jaja to a parley aboard the British ship. Suspicious of what might happen to him once he was in the clutches of the consul, Jaja refused to go. Not until the consul assured him that he would not be detained against his wish did Jaja consent to go. I hereby assure you that whether you accept or reject my proposal tomorrow, no restraint whatsoever will be put on you. You will be free to go as soon as you have heard the message of the British government. The consul wrote to Jaja. So, trusting the written pledge of a British officer of Her Britannic Majesty's government, or day, Jaja finally went to the parley. There he was detained. Went to the parley. There he was detained against his will and arrested. With your day. Now, you have to protect market. You don't have to protect yourself. So your life is what the word of a British just tell you, say, come, no worry, no will do anything. Come, no. Mugu. There he was, detained against his will and arrested. And under a threat that Opobo would be bombarded if he did not cooperate with his captors, he was kidnapped to Accra, tried there and found guilty of obstructing British trade, exiled to St. Vincent in the British West Indies, where he was allowed to contemplate the virtues of free trade and the trustworthiness of the pledge of British officials. This CHINWEIZU by himself no good. CHINWEIZU is a wicked man. And he did so for the rest of his life on an allowance of £800 a year. A man controlling £1 billion of trade. They give her £800 a year. That's like 10 billion. You they collect 10 billion a year. Somebody they give you like $50,000 a year to you're the birthday. Mugu. Other merchant princes who tried to maintain their independence suffered similar banishment. Nana of Warri, whom the British had earlier honored for maintaining peace in the market of Benin River, was later exiled by them. His crime? He would not allow a deluge of European traders to ruin his control of trade at Sapele. Thwarted, the British brought up their gunboats, 10 warships shelled his capital, Ebrohimi. For a month before it fell, Nana escaped, surrendering later to the British at Lagos. He was tried at Calabar and exiled to Accra. The year 1894. 3 years later, 1897, under the familiar pretext of abolishing human sacrifices. See, this thing about human sacrifice, please, can you tell me any culture that does not sacrifice humans to their society, to their gods? Everybody does. Till today, Europeans are still sacrificing people to their gods. They call it death sentence. But what do you think it is? What do you people think we used to sacrifice to cleanse the land in Africa before? Do you think it was hardworking, married people in their homes, children? No. It was the evil people in the society, the criminals, the killers. We catch them and we keep them as food for the gods. And we use their blood to make the ground. Now, Europeans are still doing. Tomorrow, Europeans are killing people for their gods. There's leader injection, hanging, firing squad, gas chamber. They are sacrifice. They call it death sentence. But your own, you say human sacrifice. You are shaking. You are shivering. As if this thing is one thing that we've not seen before. I don't understand though. Human sacrifice. Listen. Everybody does that shit. Blood must flow for the land to be cleansed. You understand? Evil blood must flow. Evil blood, complicit blood must be used. Treacherous blood must be used to cleanse the land. That's the way of the world. That's the way of the world. Anywhere anybody wants. Go to Europe and America, they craze. Electric chair, thank you. But they are frying people, doing all sorts. Do you know for how many years Europeans were burning people on the stake? I beg, let me even continue. This is their human sacrifice. Every time I see it irritates me, human sacrifice. 3 years later, 1897, under the familiar pretext of abolishing human sacrifice, the British marched on Benin and subdued it. The Oba of Benin had refused to allow British traders to enter the city and dominate his trade. But the British would not take no for an answer. In spite of the Oba's clear message that he did not wish to see them, especially not at a time when he had pressing priestly duties to perform, a party of Europeans led by the acting British consul set out to persuade him to grant Europeans the right of free trade within his kingdom. For rudely forcing their avaricious company upon the Oba, they were gunned down at the command of some of the Oba's lieutenants. Here was a fine pretext for the British to attack. Stop African savagery. What is more savage than disrespecting a sovereign state? I don't want to see you. I don't want to see you. Eh? Is it by force? But that is African, because we can't come now. You can't do what you like. We say do what we like back. We are the savages. Eh? That's how they were saying it in the newspapers, though. African savagery. Stop African savagery. Abolish human sacrifices. Brandishing their usual assortment of humanitarian excuses. A British column marched on Benin, sacked the city and looted its art treasures, dragged Oba of Orame off the throne of his ancestors, deported him and broke the ancient but decayed power of that kingdom. No more mention was to be made of the fundamental cause and purpose of it all. British trading encroachment on the sovereignty and economic independence of Benin. So you see, right now in this country, before I go on, that's why I want to read this. I want to give people links so you understand what is going on. All this Boko Haram, ESN, all this violence, kidnapper, headsmen, Yoruba nation, everywhere. Go to every African nation now. In Kenya, they want to fight. Al-Shabaab is there everywhere. Their savagery is happening all over Africa. Sponsored by their same agents. It's happening. What is going to say they're not going to come and help us to what is going to stop them from coming to protect us again soon? What is going to stop them from coming to stop African savagery again soon? Africa now they're not going to say now human sacrifice. They're going to say now needless bloodshed in Africa. We are going to stop the needless bloodshed in Africa. Abi? They're not going to talk now. What will you do? When you don't know people that are pushing buttons, that are making their plans they've had since as they give you your independence. See, when you are strong and sovereign, it took them 300 years. They can't give you this fake independence. They know that 100 years they need for that one to break down when the gas come back. So all these things they are doing, all this that's happening, you think you are the one, you are not. This is their game you are playing. All these people, they are playing games that are way beyond them. Because some people have called them to one room and given them money and told them, go, you are fighting for freedom. Let's continue. In 1901, another British column marched on Arochukwu to accomplish a similar mission. The British had finally discovered that the palm oil trade of all the inland markets of Igbo land was regulated by a network of oracles centered up in the Ibinukabi oracle at Arochukwu. As part of Igbo resistance to British occupation, a trade boycott had begun, organized through the network of oracles. A trade in palm oil and palm nuts had fallen off in Igbo land. To restore trade and substitute their hegemony over this coveted market, the British decided to destroy the whole of the network of oracles on the power of the area. You understand now why all our gods had to be demonized? Because the biggest resistance that Europeans faced to their encroachment wasn't the kings, wasn't the merchants that was licking their ass. It was our spirituality. It was our priests that were the biggest resistance. You understand what I'm saying? So that's why they had to demonize so much, our gods. The British had finally discovered that, I've passed the way here. The column marched on the central oracle of the network. The oracle was set on fire. His priests were executed, and the backbone of Igbo resistance to British penetration was broken. Here, as elsewhere, whatever excuses the invaders waved about, their actual objective was to seize and dominate the trade and resources of the land. West of the Niger Delta, the British marched inland from their colony of Lagos ostensibly to suppress the Yoruba civil wars, and brandishing, at least that was say Yoruba slave trade. Now when they enter, they say they are going to stop our civil wars. We are about to fight civil war. They will come and help us. Not be I need help. You want help? They will help you. Not be you want help. West of the Niger Delta, the British marched inland from their colony of Lagos ostensibly to suppress the Yoruba civil wars, and brandishing many and humanitarian excuses about the evils of those wars, they set out in their familiar fashion to wage another aggrandizing war to end all wars. Marching north on Ijebu, they shelled and massacred the population into submission for obstructing British intrusion and for refusing a British officer to protect them from some unnamed danger. That was 1892. By 1896, all of Yoruba land had come under British rule or protection and was controlled from Lagos. Their advanced parties of treaty collectors set off into diverse corners of the inland, persuading many African rulers to sign scraps of paper that brought them under British friendship and protection. They signed. But when, like Jaja, they tried to exercise their old and accustomed sovereignty, they discovered too late that their signatures had been traps and that the treaties of friendship and protection were interpreted to restrict their internal autonomy and to give the British far more power over them than they had thought they had granted, more than they would be willing to grant. And that these interpretations were going to be forced upon them by volleys of shots and the devastating thunder of big guns. They could no longer do as they liked. In 1898, when British merchant soldiers of the Royal Niger Company heard that the Nupe and Fulani were doing as they liked in the area of northwest of Lokoja, a column of 500 men with 2 field pieces and 6 machine guns set out from Lokoja to impose upon them the order of the Royal Niger Company. Cutting up the Makum of Bida's forces, they took Kaba, destroyed the Nupe camp, and marched against Bida. The chronicles of our conquerors relate the Nupe and Fulani cavalry came up to attack repeatedly, charged the British square, but could make no impression on the heavy disciplined fire of the Maxim guns. The shells exploded and wounded the Etsu Nupe. The Nupe troops retired. Rockets fired into the town caused it to be abandoned, proving mercifully that God always manages to be on the side of the better armed. Te Deum. And the chronicles of our conquerors rejoiced. This was the decisive defeat of a strong chief and implied the end of the Hausa states to the north. The country south of the Niger was declared to be free of Nupe control, and the state of slavery was declared to be abolished within it forever. Join the Amen, brainwashed colonial Africans. After this momentous victory, the Royal Niger Company's invading column in pursuit of a civilizing mission of plunder by trade moved further west against Ilorin. There, they shelled and routed a defense force of 8,000 foot soldiers and 800 cavalry. The town was entered without further opposition. The emir made peace with the British and was kept on his no longer sovereign throne. And the chronicles of our conquerors rejoice. In 51 days, the companies had dealt with 2 important states and had laid the foundations of good administration in a substantial portion of the Niger Valley. Not by the strength of their arms alone, O Lord, but by thine and the weakness of their foes. Henceforth, say the chronicles, men could go about in their own country as they wish, subject of course to British permission, without fear of raid or oppression. The company then sent its agents north, to Sokoto, to Gwandu, to Borno, bearing the intimidating news of British victories, to collect treaties of friendship and protection. For the people under the sway of these capitals, the chronicles of our conquerors complain, still looked across the desert to Muslim North Africa for their civilization, their learning and their trade. Great caravans, the chronicles of their conquerors saw, still set out. Wait, I beg. Somebody is shouting outside. I'm on a live, you please. I'm on a live. Honing and shouting. Where was I? Okay. I remember. The company then sent its agent north to Sokoto, to Gwandu, to Borno, bearing the intimidating news of British victories, to collect treaties of friendship and protection. For the people under the sway of these capitals, the chronicles of our conquerors complain, still looked across the desert to Muslim North Africa for their civilizations, their learning and their trade. Great caravans, the chronicles of our conquerors sulk, still set out as they had done for centuries, from Kukawa and Kano, with leather and slaves, with ivory. Sorry again, guys, I got cut off. With ostrich feathers and broad-back silks, swords, paper, mirrors, and salt. Though some produce went down by the river to the coast, now peddling it was, and through some European goods came back through that way to the coastal middlemen. For the most part, the trade of Hausa land did not pass through the profit fingers of the Royal Niger Company. A sad and offensive state indeed. The British catalogue of complaints continued by charging that the only thought of the great men of Hausa land was the raiding of slaves and the increase of their wealth. The country, the British claimed, groaned under the oppression of its black African rulers, gaining nothing from their rule. Armed with their garb of excuses, the British pressed their trade season invasion. In 1900, they occupied Gwandu. In 1901, Zubeiru, Emir of Yola, a fanatical opponent of white rule over black men, was overthrown by the British, which Yola captured, with his brother installed as emir in his place. Zubeiru fled his kingdom seeking, as he said in a letter to his overlord, the Sultan of Sokoto, a place to hide from the severity of the earth's dampness. He fled into the shrubs of the wilderness until he was, according to the conqueror's reports, killed by pagans. The British took Bauchi in 1902. That same year, the 1,000-year-old kingdom of Kanem Bornu was shared among the British, the French, and the German imperial appetites. The year 1903. These plunder-bent forces of civilization pounced upon Kano. The 1,000-year-old trans-Saharan trading city-state, Aliyu the emir, fled. His brother was appointed in his place. British prisons were substituted for Fulani prisons, and the populace, the conquerors claimed, was thereby liberated from the cruelties of his African ruling princes. These liberating invaders marched next on Sokoto, capital of the Sultanate. Sultan Abdurrahman, last of the line of the Ottoman Danfodio dynasty to enjoy sovereignty, defiantly declared that between Muslim faithful and Christian infidel, only war. Brave words. But he died before the British arrived at the gates of Sokoto. His successor marched out to fight, but what was the Sokoto cavalry of spears against whiff after whiff of grave shot belching from the compact British squares into the agonized faces of their loss? Sultan Atairu Amodu turned and fled, to resist another day, to resist and fall and die at Bumi in 1903. The conquerors appointed another in his place to rule a no longer sovereign sultanate, and thus, after 100 years, the empire of Ottoman Danfodio came to an end. And the jubilant chronicles of our conquerors say that there was no more military activity from the Emirates, that except for actions against pagan tribes, actions which continued till they were all finally brought into submission to British rule, British peace reigned all over the land they named Nigeria, thanks to the benevolent rapacity of our conquerors, and emasculating peace now settled upon the backs of the empires, kingdoms, and city-states of the vast lower basin of the Niger. Kanem Bornu, the Sultanate of Sokoto, the Kingdom of Benin, Yoruba land, Nupe land, and the city-state of the Delta, Warri, Boni, New Calabar, Opobo, Old Calabar, and their Igbo hinterlands were all now united in the bondage to the British. Outside the Niger Basin, in all the corners of the continent, a similar saga of invasion and resistance was enacted. In 1896, from their colony at Accra, the British renewed their long war with the Ashanti. After an effort spanning a century, an effort in which 7 wars were fought, wars in which the British were repeatedly trounced or forced to a draw, they finally occupied Kumasi, capital of the Ashanti Confederacy, and exiled Prempeh I, the Ashantenin. After an Ashanti uprising was crushed in 1900, the British annexed Ashanti land and made it a crown colony in 1901. Elsewhere, the British established their rule. In 1897, the Shona and Ndembele were subdued. At Omdurman, in the same year, the Mahdi's opposition to British hegemony over Sudan was crushed. The rest of the Nile Valley was soon to be overawed or subdued, because white missionaries of Christ working in Buganda clamored that they are losing efforts to recruit black souls for the heaven of their white God needed to be protected by white troops, and because the British masters of Egypt were demanding that all the Nile Valley should be placed under British rule, the Imperial British East Africa Company, IBEA, was in 1890 granted authority by England to trade in and administer the territory, the headwaters of the Nile. The invading captains of IBEA, in their quest for trading monopolies, attacked the sovereignties of the African kingdoms of the Upper Nile. Kabarega, the Okumanu of Bunyoro, led his kingdom in resistance. After 10 years, IBEA intrigues finally deposed him and sent him to die in exile. The king of Igara committed suicide rather than submit to white rule, man nigger. His neighbor, the king of Kajara, fled. The king of Buweju was felled by British bullets. A plundering British peace spread over the lands of the headwaters of the Nile. In 1893, Kabaka Mwanga of Buganda was persuaded by the British agents to sign himself and his subjects into British protection. He soon repented that treaty, rebelled, and was overcome. Just keep going off, every time keep going off. He died in 1901, far from the throne of his ancestors. In the year 1900, the chiefs of Buganda, in an effort to avoid war and defeat, to avoid British bullets in their chests and bayonets in their backs, to avoid being hung by British nooses from the branches of trees in their own land, signed an agreement that turned Buganda over to British for protection. Southeast of Buganda, in the vast land between the Great Lakes of the East African coast, the agents of Germany were active. A German adventurer, Karl Peters, came to East Africa in 1884 and collected the familiar treaties of friendship and protection. He returned to Germany, formed the German East African Company, and hurried back to Africa to seek trade territory. By 1891, he had met more African resistance than he could handle and turned his enterprise over to the German government. Ishke, ruler of the Unyanyembe, fought the Germans for control of Tabora and its trade routes. In 1893, German forces stormed his fortress. To avoid capture, Ishke blew himself up in his powder magazine. In 1894, Germans captured the town of Kalenga, capital of Hehe. Makwa, their chief, escaped. After 4 years of guerrilla war, he shot himself in 1898 to avoid capture by the Germans. Machemba, ruler of Yao on the Makombe Plateau, was summoned by the Germans to submit, wrote the German commander saying, "I have listened to your words, but can find no reason why I should obey you. I would rather die first. I am Sultan here in my land, you are Sultan there in yours. I will not come to you, and if you are strong enough, then come and fetch me." Brave words, yet again. He defeated several German expeditions sent to fetch him, but his courage, heroism, and talented generalship proved no match in the end for the overwhelming German firepower. He was defeated in 1899. Here, as all over the continent, wasted heroism, wasted desperate heroism, wasted because over the preceding centuries, Africa had not anticipated and prepared for her bloody date with the West. The wind of white peril stormed the states of Africa. When the dust and smoke cleared, only Ethiopia, of all the black African states, remained unconquered. At Adawa in 1896, under a foresighted and energetic Menelik, praised be his memory, Ethiopia had mastered enough of the organization of Europeans and had amassed enough European guns and ammunition to turn the tide of conquest and bruise the greedy Italian mouth on the sands of hot defeat. Everywhere else, European rule settled its colonizing buttocks at the heads of the continent. As the chronicles of our European conquerors relate that by the year 1914, of their most white Christian and civilized lord, the last cloud of African resistance had disappeared. European power exported to Africa through the effort of such free trade monopolies as the Royal Niger Company, the German East African Company, the British Imperial East African Company, the British South African Company, the Compagnie Française de l'Afrique Équatoriale, the Compagnie du Sénégal de la Côte Occidentale d'Afrique, and the United Africa Company was handed over for future husbanding with all due ceremony and flag lowering and flag raising to the direct representatives of the imperial government of Europe. But what had made possible such swift and thorough conquest? First was the contribution to enemy intelligence made by various explorers. Among the best known of these scouts were Mungo Park, David Livingstone, Richard Burton, Heinrich Barth, John Capleton, René Caillet, Count Belzoni, Count Savonan da Brazza, Henry Morton Stanley, John Speake, Major Dixon Denham, William Balfour Beatty, Gaspard Mollien, and Richard and John Lander. For nearly a century, these intrepid intelligence agents had crisscrossed Africa, spying on the land, its rivers, its people, and its states. They came wearing different guises. Mollien came disguised as a trader to spy out conditions and chart entry routes to the Senegal and Gambia River basins. On one occasion, Denham participated in a Kanuri slaving raid in order to find out, he told his companions, the fighting strength and organization of the Kanuri. Some were sponsored by kings and government, others by Christian missionary organizations, but irrespective of their sponsorship, they all served Europe's imperialist purposes. For it was the intelligence they gathered, the maps they provided, that guided the assembled powers at Berlin in partitioning Africa. And that helped their soldiers in their march upon its states. That is why these spies are lionized as heroes in the textbooks the imperialist occupiers have written for African schools. We should remember them. We cannot afford to forget the contribution they made to our defeat. But the rise of Europe to industrial power and spy work done by our agents are not sufficient to explain Europeans' swift conquest of Africa. After all, other parts of the world faced up to similar assaults from Europe. Japan was not overrun. Her eventual defeat, together with her occupation by the United States at the close of World War II, was a defeat of a different order from what we sustained at the end of the 19th century. It was a defeat of one industrial power by another. European attempts on China were in the end unsuccessful. China, though partially occupied for long periods, never entirely lost her sovereignty, never lost all control of her culture and society. Western effort to dismember her eventually failed and led, after a long century of revolutions and wars, to the triumphant emergence in our times of a powerful and sovereign China under Chairman Mao Zedong. Why, we must ask, was our defeat so swift and thorough? This is a question of paramount importance. Any genuine African nationalist or any genuine African nationalism must answer it before it can hope to succeed. We must recall that our invaders sounded their attack and our proud rulers sailed forth to throw them back. But at the testing point of arm against arms, of organization against organization, we failed utterly. We did not muster the kind of organization that could deliver the right weapons in sufficient bulk and persistence to blunt the momentum of the invaders' march and turn them back into the sea. At Bumi, at Umduman, at Segu, at Tabora, Ijebu, Kumasi, Arochukwu, and countless other battlefields, we met defeat. The European victory at Adowa was the exception that proved the point of our weakness. Finally, our weakness stood exposed. And all because of the 4 preceding centuries, our leaders had been preoccupied with Sorry guys, I had an important call. Had been too busy organizing our continent for the exploitative advantage of Europe. Oh, sorry, let me take this again. We had long been pathetically weak. Finally, our weakness stood exposed. And all because for the 4 preceding centuries, our leaders had been preoccupied with exporting, with inadequate compensations or none at all, our human and material resources, had been too busy organizing our continent for the exploitative advantage of Europe, had been too busy with slaving raids upon one another, too busy decorating themselves with trinkets imported from Europe and throwing away our invaluable manhood, our irreplaceable gold, diamonds and ivory, too busy under various European inducements, impoverishing and disorganizing the land to take thought and long-range action to protect our sovereignty. And at the end of those 4 misused centuries, where our ancestors have showed ruinous gain, we, their descendants, reaped conquest and humbling indignities. We must keep before us the pivotal importance of that conquest. I will repeat what our leaders were doing for 400 years again. I will repeat it, whether it is not what these same people are doing today. And all because we had long been pathetically weak. Finally, our weakness stood exposed. And all because for 4 preceding centuries, our leaders had been preoccupied with exporting, with inadequate compensations, or none at all, our human and material resources, had been too busy organizing our continent for the exploitative advantage of Europe, had been too busy with slaving raids upon one another, too busy decorating themselves with trinkets imported from Europe and throwing away our invaluable manhood, under various European endorsements, impoverishing and disorganizing the land to take thought and long-range action to protect our sovereignty. And at the end of those 4 misused centuries, where our ancestors have sowed ruinous gain, we, their descendants, reaped conquest and humbling indignities. We must keep before us the pivotal importance of that conquest. At this point, I want you to know that this book was written in 1975. At this point, this book was written in 1975. Nothing like you are seeing today was happening. You know? But the foundation of this behavior was already being sown. So people like my father were making noise. People like Nkrumah, people like CHINWEIZU But now we can see clearly that these people are the descendants of slave traders, slave raiders. These people cannot develop Africa. They are the same as their ancestors that left us exposed. They are too busy exporting exporting all our resources. They are selling oil and gold for paper. They are selling for paper, for dollar. Paper. They are letting white people come to our continent, take oil, gold, substantial things, our brain drain. That is the new slave trade. When you think there's no slave trade, brain drain, by making sure that Africa cannot meet the potential of Africans, the best of Africans. Because slave trade was all about kidnapping the best Africans. Now they don't have to kidnap the best Africans. Africans cannot provide for the best Africans, so the best Africans willingly move to serve Europe and America. They are organizing Africa for Europe's interest, exporting everything we have for paper. We are paper. Because Europeans say the paper has value. You can use the paper to buy things that Europeans make. You don't want to make your own. So now this paper that Europeans have, they've told you, give us your oil is value. Gold, this is real shit. Real. You can't use it to do anything. So instead of you to use it to do something, to do the hard work, you collect their paper to go and buy what they use your things to make. And one day. We are not done. The humiliation, the last page, we're almost done. Then we can all go and enjoy our life. I mean, we can continue enjoying our life. And these are the particulars of the neglect. During 4 centuries of intercourse with the West, our ruling classes, especially our coastal ruling classes, keepers of our waterfront to the world, did not exercise foresight, did not bother to learn to make the arms they imported daily, did not bother to master the ways of the trading partners from overseas, did not bother to copy and improve upon the European ships and gunboats. They were satisfied with their vulnerable fleets of war canoes, nor did they strive to reorganize their strength just in case some future conquest should erupt between them and those trading partners who observantly rode their big ships at anchor of the sandbars. And though the armories of the ruling classes, now listen, you know, these people do not even have the arms, eh? They even refuse to use them. They learn how to use it. Although the armories of the ruling classes were stuffed with weapons of all kinds, muskets and cannons included, they neglected to organize standing armies against possible invaders from the sea. In Benin alone, before the disastrous civil wars of the 19th century, each of the 18 major trading houses had well over 2,500 muskets bequeathed from slave hunting times. The musketeers of Bornu, though established in the 16th century, remained largely ceremonial and ineffectual. They did not improve. The rulers had sat on the crumbling carcasses of their states as they stagnated and decayed. The rulers took little thought for the future that was encroaching on them from across the waterfront. And when that future burst upon their head, it toppled their rusted power, picked them off their stools and thrones, and blinded them with the dust of ruin. And because they had not adequately prepared for their showdown with the West, their desperate heroism under attack was thoroughly wasted. 4 long centuries wasted on particularist greed, 4 exhausting centuries bloodily exporting their kind, 4 centuries of political disorientation and social disorganization made their souls sleep without rest in our memories to warn us away from any repetition of their ruinous neglect. Let me repeat. May their souls sleep without rest in our memories to warn us away from any repetition of their ruinous neglect. Bam. End of the chapter. Tell me what is different from these men and these people that you people are following up and down today what is the difference? How are we not as exposed right now? You see, the way we are in Africa today, everybody doing business is doing business on behalf of a European. All our music is in the hand of European company. Trace, MTV, everybody controlling, taking our sense, which we have, everybody is safe because There's no African alternative. Everything we have, all our farmlands, is used to grow things that they need in Europe. Coffee. What the fuck is coffee in Nigeria? Who is drinking it? Tea? They are growing tea? For who? Okay. The whole fucking country. Europeans will just come. These people go and collect some native farm, buy it from the people that own it. You understand? This is what is going on now. Pack all the land. They will not tell them what to be growing there, to be exporting to Europe. Europeans will be giving them monthly or yearly payment for the job. Whereas we are here, hungry like street dogs. And all of you will sit down in your house, think that you are sharp. Go and work for all these people. You think that you are sharp. I'm telling you, we are at that point again. You see, tell me what is the difference? This is this point. Can't you understand what I'm trying to say? That this point that this man is talking about, this moment in history has finally come full circle. We are back to this moment. We are vulnerable. We are exposed. We are weak. And we are there for the taking. And watch. That's the next step. All of you are going to become protectorate. Now they will come start to protect us from ourselves. Just watch.